Hey guys, welcome to FoundFlix and another edition of Ending Explained. Though I guess it would be more appropriate to call this video Everything Explained, because the ending of Prometheus doesn't really need much explaining. Shaw and David fly away in a spaceship. That's the end. But there's obviously a lot more to dig into with this movie. So in anticipation of Alien Covenant, I rewatched Prometheus and thought this would be the perfect time to look back at the movie and all of its lingering unanswered mysteries. What happened to the engineers? What motivated David to poison Holloway? Many aspects of the movie are left a little vague, as it seems more interested in posing questions rather than answering them directly. And my thoughts will only be pertaining to Prometheus, as I haven't seen Alien Covenant yet. I know it's out internationally, and there are spoilers everywhere, but please don't spoil Covenant in the comments. I'll be doing an Ending Explained for Covenant later this week, so save all your spoilers till then if you would be so kind. Thank you so much. I'll be pointing out important clues and details to quickly refresh you on what goes down in the movie. But if you want to skip right to me looking at Prometheus's big questions, check for the link in the description below. Alright guys, let's get it started. The movie begins on an indeterminate planet, introducing us to a race of beefy, godlike, giant white dudes called the Engineers. In the scene, we see the process of how they create life on new planets. One engineer, considered a gardener, is left behind to sacrifice himself in order to kickstart the process of life. This is accomplished by him drinking a black goo substance. Gooey goodness. The effect of drinking it instantly changes his DNA and destroys his body, falling into a river as it dissolves. But in the process of his body dissolving, after mixing with the DNA of the black goo, life begins to form on the new planet. And it is through this process that evolution occurs, eventually leading to the creation of humankind. Many years later, we meet scientists Dr. Shaw and Holloway. During an excavation, they discover cave paintings illustrating what appears to be the Engineer, with several different stars around it. There have been paintings almost identical to this one discovered all over the globe, including one in Scotland from 35,000 years ago. The ancient Earth civilizations had no contact with each other, but somehow each drew the same painting, seemingly worshipping the Engineers. This indicates that the Engineers have visited these various areas all over Earth thousands and thousands of years ago. Using the formation of the stars in the sky, they pinpoint a particular system that matches the formation of the cave drawings. The system has a sun like ours and one planet that appears capable of life. LV-223. So with the help of $1 trillion, courtesy of Peter Weyland of the shady Weyland-Yutani Corporation seen throughout the series, a team is assembled to travel to the planet in an attempt to track down the Engineers and solve the mystery of who created man. They reach LV-223, entering a temple which seems to be a military installation for the Engineers, where they store the weaponized black goo and their ships, complete with an alien-looking rock formation on top. Inside, they discover the area is creating its own atmosphere and conclude that someone must have been terraforming on the planet, though it seems like no one is around now. But there's evidence of something big going down. David also discovers something interesting in this scene. He wipes off green slime or green goo from the wall. When he pulls his fingers apart, there are many particles within the slime, and it makes a sort of electric sound. It does look similar to the xenomorph's acid saliva, but it seems to be a different substance entirely. Based on its appearance, it actually seems to be tied to the Engineers technology, the same kind of technology that creates the sphere in the ship and produces the recorded holograms as well. Perhaps it is also this same technology that powered the doors in the temple and it's leaking here or something, I don't know. David presses a sequence into buttons in the wall, activating a recorded hologram showing us several Engineers in space jockey suits running from something. The team chases after one who falls down dead in front of a massive door. Its body is found still there now in front of the door, decapitated. Shaw uses a carbon dater on its body and determines that it has been there for 2,000 years. David finds more rock buttons to press and opens the door despite them not knowing what's on the other side. Inside, there is a mass of ampules all over the place, and they look constructed, not naturally occurring like, say, an egg. And there's a huge mural on the wall depicting what looks like the xenomorph in some form emerging from liquid. It looks more like the Deacon alien seen at the end of this film rather than the traditional xenomorph, an important distinction. While the xenomorph doesn't technically exist yet, we see the Engineers are aware of the Deacon form, which is created by mixing human or engineer DNA with the goo. It's obvious that this room hasn't been entered in a very long time, and our crew inadvertently affects the atmosphere by opening the door, causing goo to pour out from the ampules, and strange movement is seen on the ceiling. With a storm coming, Shaw takes the engineer's head and David takes an ampule, but first he refreezes it, preventing it from reacting to the changing atmosphere like the others. Back on the ship, Shaw analyzes the head, revealing that it is in fact an engineer inside. It's seen with black growths on its head, new life forming. So this engineer must have been affected by the goo in some capacity, and the head was kind of preserved, slowing the growth until the door was opened by the Prometheus crew. They managed to shock the head back to life momentarily, but it quickly goes nuts, bubbling and then finally exploding. Shaw analyzes the DNA of the engineer's head and discovers that its DNA is the same as our own. A perfect match, in fact. Meanwhile, David, who we see previously scheming with someone, obviously an alive Wayland, cracks open the ampule, taking a drop of goo on his finger. And here David begins his experiments with the black goo, convincing Holloway to drink some in a glass of champagne. He does actually convince Holloway to take the drink, asking how far he would be willing to go for answers. No matter what it takes, Holloway responds, and thusly David has a willing subject. We get some more insight into David's motivation here. When David asks why he was created, Holloway tells him humans made him simply because they could. David mentions how disappointing it would be to hear something like that, essentially declaring that as an android, he is a lesser being to humans. But luckily, androids don't get disappointed. Or do they? It sure seems like David does, at least, since he poisons Holloway with the goo just to see what happens. And that's what kicks off the rest of the movie, seeing the effects the black goo has on various victims that encounter it. But Holloway is unaware of what's in his body. He discusses with Shaw about the engineers creating us, but who created them? Good question. But Holloway thinks that creating life is no big deal really, just a dash of DNA and a sprinkle of life. Shaw is bummed though because she can't get pregnant, so what does that mean about her? Well, Shaw, you're in luck, as she and Holloway pork here, and Shaw becomes impregnated by the goo, which is flowing through Holloway's system. Oh boy. Back on the surface, the two dodo birds, Fifield and Glasses Magoo, are lost in the temple, even though Fifield is the one who made a map of the area in the first place, but that's only the beginning of their stupidity. They come across a pile of engineer bodies all stopped by a door, and they remark that some have been opened from the inside, no doubt the effect of a chest burster. Back in the big headroom, there's something slithering in the river of black goo that now covers the ground. The creature, called a hammerpede, pops out to say hello to the guys. Its appearance is like a snake, with its fan mouth looking a bit cobra-like, and it is certainly aggressive, attacking Glasses Magoo, who tries to reach out and touch it, like any genius would do when encountering a new alien creature on a faraway planet. As for the origins of the hammerpede, it's possible that it is a creature that natively inhabits the planet, but I think that it is actually caused by worms, as seen earlier, mixing with the black goo. We see that the mutation that occurs by the goo takes on the form of its original host, and it makes sense that it could have begun as a worm based on its appearance. And we don't see the hammerpede until after the goo is all over the ground. Fifield tries his best to help Glasses, but when he cuts the hammerpede, it sprays acid blood onto his helmet, destroying it. Fifield freaks out and ends up face first in the goo river, mixing with his face via the broken helmet. Oh, Fifield. Later, David is exploring a Juggernaut ship, coming across space jockey suits and the ship's main navigation. He fiddles with buttons, causing a chair to swivel out, and more engineer holograms appear. The engineer plays a tune on his flute, and the orrery comes to life, a brilliant display of planets and galaxies filling the room. And we see the engineer set a destination for what looks like present-day Earth. The hologram disappears, and David approaches a cryosleep chamber with an engineer still inside, and alive, as David hears its heartbeat. Holloway is getting worse, affected by the black goo in his system, and Vickers refuses to let him on board, wielding a flamethrower. Holloway gives in, telling her to do it, and she lights his ass up, killing Holloway. So we don't see the full progression of the goo on him, but it seemed that he was deteriorating rather than turning into a monster or anything like that. On the ship, Shaw is being examined by David, who reveals that she is 3 months pregnant, even though she and Holloway only had intercourse 10 hours ago. Well, that's definitely surprising, but as David points out, this isn't exactly a traditional fetus. Yikes! His solution is to put her into cryostasis until they return to Earth. This suggests that cryostasis will slow the infestation process, and David is hoping to take Shaw and her alien baby back to Earth for some horrifying reason. Shaw manages to get free and performs self-surgery with an advanced machine to remove the weird octopus alien known as the trilobite from her stomach. Then Fifield shows up at the Prometheus, all crazy and monstery looking, going on a rampage. The goo has made him much stronger and more primitive as well. We don't know the end result of what Fifield would mutate into either, as he also gets dispatched by the crew, but it does take a hell of a lot of firepower to finally take him out. And then we find out that Weyland is still alive. Well, it's not much of a surprise, as the Weyland-Yutani Corporation has always been shady and willing to lie for their own purposes. And basically, Weyland was hoping the engineers could help him cheat death in some way, since he's so incredibly old. And David found that one still alive, and I'm sure he'll have all the answers they're looking for. They return to revive the engineer, coming across thousands of black goo ampules in a cargo hold. David reveals the engineer was heading to Earth, obviously to destroy humanity, as in order to create, sometimes one must destroy. Something David is becoming more intimately familiar with. They bring the engineer back and Shaw questions him, asking why they hated humans and what they did wrong, which are pretty reasonable questions. But Weyland is the one in charge and the one footing the bill, and approaches the engineer, asking him to extend his already way too long life. The engineer does seem impressed that David can speak his language, and then looks at the wrinkled old bag that is Weyland. And he's obviously like, dude, are you seriously asking me to let you live longer? And it seems to reignite his desire to destroy us, and he decides to show the humans what it thinks of their crummy version of life by taking David's head off, hitting Weyland with it, and attacking the others. Weyland is mortally wounded, bleeding out on the ground, and as he expires, he is disappointed, saying there is nothing. David's head nearby chimes in, agreeing with him, saying, I know. Man, all that hoping to avoid dying Weyland was trying to do, and as he dies, he knows that there is nothing waiting for him on the other side. Poor bastard. The engineer touches a green energy ball thing, bringing out the classic space jockey chair first discovered in Alien. He sets the course back for Earth to continue his mission to destroy humanity, and the ship lifts off. But Captain Janik and the Prometheus crew stop him, crashing their ship into his. As the ship collides with the ground, it starts rolling in a perfectly straight line. Vickers tries to outrun it, but she gets crushed, because she is apparently incapable of running in a different direction than directly in the path of the gigantic ship. I can't change directions! Back on the crashed ship, Shaw's trilobite baby is on the loose and is now huge, now more resembling an oversized facehugger. The engineer appears and Shaw sets the trilobite loose on the engineer, who gobbles him up as Shaw escapes. Now alone, Shaw gets a message from David's head asking for her help. She's understandably uninterested in helping him since he's been such a jerk recently, but he says he can get her off the planet, as there's many more ships. Without an option and even more desperate for answers, she retrieves David's head, and the two take a ship. Their destination, the engineer's homeworld. She still wants to know what's the deal with the engineers and why they changed their minds and wanted to kill humanity. And they're off in search of answers that we will probably never get, as the original sequel to Prometheus evolved into Alien Covenant, seemingly abandoning much of what Prometheus set up. But even if we won't get definitive answers, there's still enough clues in the movie to figure out some of the bigger questions the movie asks and doesn't answer. So let's see if we can unravel the mysteries. What's the deal with the black goo? The black liquid is first introduced in Prometheus and has huge implications for the entirety of the Alien franchise, seemingly being responsible for the creation of the xenomorph itself. It was originally created by the engineers as a biological weapon for war, and its purpose was to wipe out entire planets. It is a lethal mutagenic pathogen, composed of millions of small microorganisms. It's kept in those ampules due to its unstable nature at ambient temperature. As we see, once the crew enters the room and disrupts the atmosphere, the ampules begin to react. We've seen throughout the series that the alien creatures infect their host, causing them to mutate, and that is happening in its most basic form via the black liquid. Once exposed to another organism, there is an immediate effect to the host's body, turning them aggressive and primitive, as seen with Fifield, who is also super strong, requiring a bunch of shotgun blasts and a flamethrower to finally get taken down. But how does the goo lead to the classic xenomorph getting created? We see the Deacon alien that is caused by the trilobite infecting the engineer, and it bears some resemblance to the Xeno, but smaller and much more human-like. So it must be through infecting a different creature that leads to the evolution eventually creating the xenomorph. And to me, it seems like the real key to creating the Xeno is seen through Shaw's baby. By using her reproductive system with the goo, it created a much more similar creature than seen any other time in the movie. So maybe through the continued experiments of David, using Shaw's reproductive system and the black goo can force evolution to create that perfect killing machine. What motivated David to poison Holloway? Without paying too much attention to the movie, it is definitely difficult to understand what motivated David in the first place. The only real clue is where he's seen on a call with someone. We don't really hear what is said, but when confronted by Vickers about it, he reveals that he was told to try harder. We know now that it was Wayland that he was talking to, and that the real purpose of the Prometheus mission was for Wayland to find a way to cheat his impending death. To David, Wayland is his father, and so he doesn't want to disappoint him. At this point, they believe all the engineers are dead, and so they won't be able to help Wayland. The only thing David has as an option with unknown potential is the goo. And just as the humans are willing to do anything to find the answers they seek, David is in the same position with his experiment, poisoning Holloway. He's willing to sacrifice a few humans if it means being able to help Wayland in any way. And I feel his motivations become a little deeper, first revealed in that scene with Holloway. Holloway tells David that he was created by the humans simply because they could. And I feel like this has a real impact on David, making him as an android feel like a lesser being. But to him, in order to prove what he's capable of, he wants to create life himself. The idea of Prometheus was for man to become equal with God, but it seems that David is the one playing God here. This is only really hinted at in Prometheus, and I think we'll see him taking on a whole new level to his experiments in Covenant. What happened to the engineers? We see in the holograms of the engineers that clearly they were being chased by something, and only one, the one found in the cryostasis pod, is still alive. It's obvious to assume that what befell the engineers was an outbreak of the black goo, which then infected the engineers, wiping them out. But I think that's a little too simple. These engineer guys seem pretty intelligent and have thousands of these goo ampules everywhere. It just seems a little silly that one of them would just accidentally drop one or something. Like, whoops, Butterfingers, we're all dead now. So to me, rather than an accident, I believe that there was an attack that occurred on the temple, and there's some evidence that actually supports this. Even at the entrance of the temple, it looks like that part of the wall has been broken, and everyone has to crouch to fit through the entrance. So there's no way those giant white dudes are gonna fit through there. It appears the invaders could have busted their way in through this hole. But who was attacking them? Right before the holograms appear, when David activates them, we hear a very distinct roaring sound. And it's of the Deacon alien. Based on the sound it makes at the end of the movie, the two are identical. So it's obvious the black goo did get loose, as we see the engineers are infected, but there's also the Deacon, which doesn't come into existence directly from the goo. So again, I believe there might have been other engineers engaged in a civil war with those in the temple. We know the engineers seen wanted to destroy humanity, and perhaps others of their species didn't agree with this and were trying to stop them, leading to the incident at the temple. Why did the engineers want to kill us? Based on Sean Holloway's findings, the engineers seemed cool with humans for a long time, checking in on their creation's progress and leaving clues via the star formations to find the engineers when man became advanced enough. But then 2,000 years ago, something changed and the engineers suddenly wanted to destroy us. They had to have been triggered by a specific event, because if the engineers just wanted to destroy us, they could have done it at any point in history. Weirdly enough, the earlier versions of Prometheus include the engineers sending an ambassador to Earth to correct the wrongs that mankind was doing. And that engineer was Jesus. Yep, Jesus was an alien. And of course, mankind killed Jesus, which would be more than enough for the engineers to create a plan to destroy all of humanity, essentially declaring us not able to be saved. They ended up abandoning this alien Jesus concept for being far too on the nose, but we can still carry over to the general idea of humanity being seen more as a destructive force than productive. And to the engineers, we are merely playthings, the result of an experiment. So the engineers deemed the human experiment to be a failure and wanted to destroy it. How does the movie connect to Alien? Prometheus doesn't directly connect to Alien, but there are still a few important elements introduced that tie back to the original. We've got the black goo, which I've already covered, so the most notable thing is the reveal of the creature seen back in Alien, called the pilot or space jockey, is not a creature but is actually an engineer wearing armor. The space jockey's ship was always considered a bomber ship and used the eggs as bombs for warfare. So that concept of using the aliens as a weapon has been around for quite some time. And we see that develop much further in Prometheus. Though an alien, the Juggernaut ship was full of actual eggs, not the ampules seen in Prometheus. So there's still a few evolutionary steps to get to the organic egg seen in the original series. Also, we don't know how the engineer got the eggs and crashed on LV-426. The original script would have had the engineer David Revives becoming the space jockey, but this was changed in the final version. And there's still at least 2 sequels after Covenant to tie us to Alien, so there's still a lot more twists and turns before we finally get to that moment connected to the original film. There's also, of course, the ubiquitous Weyland-Yutani Corporation, and we meet Peter Weyland himself. Weyland-Yutani has been at the center of pretty much every entry in the series, often responsible for the missions themselves, as seen in Prometheus. They are obviously obsessed with the aliens and are constantly trying to capture them for their own purposes. And it seems like the events of Prometheus kicked off their unhealthy desire to learn more about the aliens that continues throughout the entire series. Well guys, I think that's a pretty solid breakdown of Prometheus and its many big questions. I'm sure there's stuff I missed, but this movie is loaded with mysteries. Like, who created the engineers? But there's almost no information to go on in the movie, so I have absolutely no idea. So maybe you guys know who created the engineers. Let me know. And if there's other lingering questions you guys have that I didn't cover about the movie, leave them in the comments below. And make sure to check back this weekend for my Alien Covenant ending explained video. Thanks for watching Found Flicks. See you next time.